What if the man who put a ring on your finger never intended for you to survive the wedding? Colleen Lawford was 20 years old, soaking wet, kneeling on a rain-slicked New York street, when a man who had lived for 300 years looked at the glowing mark on her bleeding wrist and felt nothing except relief, because she wasn't a person to him. Not yet. She was a solution. And some solutions are only needed once. New York City, October 2020. Beneath the Empire State Building. Beneath the marble and the noise and the 10 million lives stacked on top of each other, there is a room that does not exist on any map. Ancient stone walls, the scent of iron and extinguished candles. A throne that has never needed to be large, because the man who sits in it has never needed to raise his voice. Alexander Radbourne, 330 years old, wearing every single one of them behind a face that looked no older than 30. Pale as winter light, eyes the deep red of an old wound. A man who had watched empires rise and fall, and learned, through all of it, one thing. Sentiment is a weakness. Power is the only truth. But that October night, even power had a problem. A curse, ancient, spreading, moving through his bloodline, threatening to drain both Alexander and his intended. The pure-blood vampire Francis Larkin. Of their immortality, his seer, Elias Voss, delivered the verdict without flinching. The only way to break it. Marry a poor human girl. Make her carry your child. At 8 months, 3 bites will transfer the curse to her and the child. Francis will be saved. Alexander didn't hesitate. Find her. Tonight. Elias placed a single crimson thread in his palm, silk thin, glowing faintly. Whoever bears this mark on her wrist is already chosen. Colleen had been awake since 4 that morning. The heating in her apartment had failed again. Her grandmother's cough had filled the dark with a sound so fragile it hurt to hear. Before she left, Colleen made oatmeal, poured it into a thermos, and tucked a handwritten note beneath her grandmother's favorite photograph. The two of them at Coney Island, years ago, squinting into the sun. "Grandma, eat before your medicine. I'll be home by 9. I love you more than sleep." Then she stepped out into the storm. No umbrella, no car, just a worn bicycle. A Harvard medical exam she couldn't afford to miss, and a dream so quiet most people would have dismissed it. To give ordinary people, the ones the world forgot, one more month of life. One more morning with someone they loved. She was never saving herself. She never was. She never saw the limousine. One moment. Rain, wind, motion. The next, metal, pavement, pain. Her bicycle crumpled beneath her. Blood bloomed from her wrist. And the bandage she'd worn her whole life over a faint birthmark began to glow. Not shimmer, not reflect, glow, neon red, pulsing in the dark like a heartbeat that wasn't hers. The limousine door opened. A man stepped out, tall, utterly still, rain falling around him as though it knew better than to touch him. He looked at her wrist, then at her face, and in a voice as quiet and final as a closing door, "You're the one I've been looking for." Colleen's mind raced. A mistake, a nightmare she hadn't woken from yet. But the mark kept glowing, as if it had been waiting her whole life for this exact moment in the rain. She had ridden through a storm for a dream she believed in with everything she had. And she had no idea that everything was about to change. Stay with us, because what happens in the next few minutes will make you question everything you think you know about this man. If the man who married you had planned from the beginning for you not to survive, and you only found out later, would you have stayed to fight or walked away to heal? Tell me in 3 words. The marriage certificate was signed in a basement office beneath the city. Stone walls, no windows, the smell of old paper and older decisions. No flowers, no one who smiled, just Colleen's trembling hand. A pen that felt heavier than anything she had ever held. And Alexander standing 3 feet away, watching the way someone watches a transaction complete. She told herself it wasn't real. But the ink dried, the door closed, and the world she had known, the thermos, the bicycle, the note tucked beneath her grandmother's photograph, felt suddenly very far away. They took her to a place sunlight had never touched, a Manhattan mansion buried beneath the city. Marble floors, vaulted ceilings, chandeliers burning with cold blue light. Beautiful the way a museum is beautiful. Preserved, untouched, unlived in. Colleen stood in the center of the entrance hall and said, "I have conditions." Alexander turned slowly, as though the word itself were foreign to him. She held her ground, chin lifted, voice steadier than she felt. "My grandmother stays safe, somewhere warm, with doctors she can trust. She doesn't come near any of this. Done. I continue my medical studies. I don't disappear." A longer pause. Done. She hesitated on the third, because it wasn't logistical. "You treat me like a person," she said quietly, "not an arrangement." For just a fraction of a second, something moved behind those red eyes. Not warmth, not yet, but the quality of someone paying attention in a way they hadn't been before. He said nothing, but he didn't say no. Within a week, Colleen had found the hidden laboratory. She hadn't been invited. She had simply followed the scent of something chemical and ancient until she found a door that wasn't quite locked, and walked through it the way she walked through every door, like she had every right to be there, and the world simply hadn't caught up yet. What she found stopped her breath. Vials of a blood compound, cataloged by century, research notes in 17 languages, formulations that no university laboratory had ever documented. She picked up a sample, held it to the cold blue light. Her Harvard training took over before her fear could. Late-stage cancer cells, aggressive, resistant to every known treatment, were being dismantled by the compound, precisely, without collateral damage to healthy tissue. She ran the analysis 3 times. Then she sat down on the floor, pressed her back against the cabinet, and stared at the ceiling. A cure. Real. Right here. The following morning, she volunteered her own blood, combined with a carefully measured sample from a vial she labeled only as donor, and arranged for it to reach a patient named Mrs. Eleanor Park at a nearby hospital. 73 years old, no family, no options. She asked for nothing in return. She left no name. Alexander had been watching through the security feed. He told himself it was surveillance, the monitoring of an asset. But he watched her work for 6 hours straight, cross-legged on the lab floor, hair unwashed, muttering calculations, and felt something shift in his chest that he hadn't felt in decades. A human life lasted 70, 80 years at most. He had trained himself never to look too closely, never to notice the small, specific ways they loved things. Why was he noticing now? He went to her room that night, not to speak, only to leave something at the door. A small sachet woven from blood orchid petals, an ancient herb used for centuries to quiet pain and ease nightmares. He left it on the threshold and walked away before she could open the door. He didn't understand why he did it. That unsettled him more than the curse ever had. Colleen found the sachet in the morning. She didn't know what it was, but the scent pulled at a memory she couldn't quite reach. Something warm and safe. From before Harvard. Before her grandmother's cough had become the sound she measured all silences against. She brought it to breakfast. What is this? She held it across the empty dining table toward him. Alexander looked at it briefly. Something to help you sleep. Nothing more. She tucked it into her coat pocket and carried it all day. That night, she dreamed of a pale boy. 15, maybe. Crumpled at the base of a tree in a garden that no longer existed. A girl pressed something into his palm and whispered, "Don't be afraid, I've got you." She woke before dawn, sachet still in her hand, heart racing. Something about that boy felt like a bruise she hadn't known she was carrying. 2 months in. Colleen attended a Harvard alumni gathering. She had worked too hard to disappear from her own life. She lasted 40 minutes before her former classmates found her. The kind who had never ridden a bicycle in the rain, never made oatmeal at 4 in the morning for someone they loved. They had heard she'd married someone no one had ever met, that she was living underground like a secret. One of them set a small vitamin pill on the floor. "Isn't that what you take now? Go on then." The laughter that followed was the kind with no warmth in it at all. Colleen stood still, the way she had always stood still in rooms where she was the smallest person, and felt the old weight of invisibility press against her ribs. Then the room temperature dropped. Not metaphorically, dropped. Alexander stepped from the entrance, unhurried, eyes no longer hidden. What followed was slow and deliberate. One by one, without a raised voice, he used his power to bring each of them to their knees. Not violently, just inevitably. He walked to Colleen. "We're leaving." In the car. She stared out the window for a long time. "You didn't have to do that." "No," he agreed. She looked at him. Truly looked. For perhaps the first time. "Then why did you—" He didn't answer, but his jaw tightened in a way that looked, strangely, like someone trying not to feel something they weren't yet prepared to feel. 8 months passed without her noticing, which frightened her more than anything. The mansion had become, without permission, something close to home. The lab was hers. The blood orchid sachets appeared at her door every 3rd night, and she had stopped pretending she didn't look for them. Alexander was not kind. Not in the way her grandmother was kind, but he was present. He sat with her on sleepless nights in the lab and said nothing, simply existing nearby, like a wall that had quietly decided to become a shelter. Something inside her had shifted. She knew it, and it terrified her. Then she heard the voice through the hallway. "Francis Larkin." On a video call. Voice smooth and certain. "She believes he's changing. Let her. She'll fulfill her purpose either way." Colleen stood in the corridor with the sachet in her hand and felt the evening's warmth drain away like water through open fingers. Was he changing? Or was she simply becoming easier to use? She thought of the boy in her dream, abandoned in a garden, no one coming. She thought of the note she'd left under the Coney Island photograph. "I love you more than sleep." I have been here before, she thought. I have stayed too long for people who needed me more than they knew how to say it. That has never once kept me safe, just when she thought she could trust again. The past returned. What Colleen discovers at the Blood Temple next will change everything she thought she knew about Alexander and herself. don't go anywhere. She shouldn't have gone. She knew it the way you know a door is wrong before you open it. The way you feel a silence before anyone speaks into it. But Colleen had spent 8 months learning that the things that frightened her were usually the things she needed to walk toward. She found the Blood Temple address carved into the back of an old map of Lower Manhattan, beneath a building that had changed its name 4 times since 1890. She went alone, 8 months along, coat buttoned over the weight of a child she had begun. Quietly, without permission, to love. The temple smelled of iron and incense, and centuries of decisions made without consent. Stone floors, candles the color of dried roses, symbols carved into walls that had no English translation, only feeling. The feeling of finality, of fates already sealed. Elias Voss stood at the altar with his back to her. He didn't seem surprised. "You came," he said. "Tell me the truth," Colleen said. "The whole truth, not the version he approved." Elias turned. His eyes, ancient, gray, the color of rivers that had carried too much, moved to her wrist. The root of the curse was never the bloodline. It was a choice made 3 centuries ago by a young man given power he never asked for, who used it once to protect something he loved. That kind of imbalance always comes with a price. Colleen's hand moved to her stomach. What price? Before he could answer, every candle in the room snapped out. Not flickered, snapped, all at once. And in the darkness, a voice turned the room to ice. Frances Larkin did not enter rooms. She arrived in them, the way weather arrives, inevitable, already everywhere, beautiful in the way certain cold things are beautiful. She set a tablet on the altar and pressed play. The footage was clear, time-stamped, unambiguous. Alexander. Months before the sachets, before the graduation party, before jaw-tightening silences in the back of cars, meeting with Frances in a private room, planning the car crash, confirming the mark, arranging the marriage, all of it. His voice on the recording, precise and emotionless. She must not know the purpose until the 8th month. Keep her comfortable, keep her studying, keep her manageable. That word, manageable. Not a person, not even a solution anymore. Something to be kept in order. Frances picked up the tablet with a measured smile. He has bitten you twice already. While you slept, while you trusted him. You'll finish your purpose, and then Alexander will come back to where he belongs. She walked back to the mansion because there was nowhere else to go. That was the part that undid her most. Not the betrayal itself. She had half suspected the betrayal. She had warned herself in every quiet moment she'd allowed herself to feel something. It was that she had nowhere else to go. She stood in the doorway of the lab. Her lab. She'd called it in her mind, which now seemed unbearably foolish, and looked at everything she had built. Her notes on the cancer compound, Mrs. Eleanor Park's chart, the research she had believed, genuinely believed, would change the world. All of it still there. The blood orchid sachet from the night before, still on the workbench where she'd set it down to look at it in the morning light. The room was exactly the same. She was the only thing that had changed. She sat down on the floor, the same floor where she'd first seen the cancer cells dissolving, and pressed her back against the cabinet. The child moved inside her, just once, quietly, as if to say, "I'm still here." And Colleen, who had made oatmeal at 4 in the morning, ridden through storms, dreamed of giving the world 800 million extra years of life, allowed herself, finally, to feel the full weight of it. She had been chosen to be used, and the man she had begun to trust had designed it from the very beginning. Alexander found her in the lab. He stood in the doorway without speaking. She looked up, dry-eyed, very still, holding herself the way you hold something fragile when it's become the only thing in the room. "Tell me it isn't true," she said. Not a demand, a request. The kind that already knows the answer and asks only because the asking is the last human thing left to do. Alexander looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said. One word. Low. Absolute. "The plan was arranged from the beginning. You and the child were always meant to carry the curse." He didn't look away. Neither did she. "Was any of it real?" she asked. "The sachet, standing beside me at that party. Any of it?" He said nothing, and in that silence, worse than any answer, Colleen understood something she would spend the next 6 years trying to unknow. He hadn't lied about caring. He simply hadn't stopped the plan. Somehow. That was worse. She stood, smoothed her coat, looked at him one last time. "Then we're done," she said. She walked to the lab bench and pulled out every research note, every compound formula, everything she had built in the months she had spent believing in something. She would find a way to protect her child herself, not because anyone had given her the tools, but because she was Colleen Lawford, and she had never once waited for permission to fight for the people she loved. The hospital was white tile and cold light, and the silence of a place that has witnessed too much to react to any of it. Colleen's emergency serum, blood orchid compound combined with her own cells, assembled across 3 sleepless nights, was already in her bloodstream. She didn't know if it would hold. She only knew she had tried. The child arrived in a surge of light and motion and a cry that tore through the sterile quiet. And then, stillness. The kind that is not peace. Alexander moved from the far edge of the room. Slowly, as if moving quickly might make it more real. He took the tiny, motionless form in hands that had governed bloodlines for 3 centuries, and held it the way someone holds the one thing they would give everything back for. His voice came out barely above a breath. "Until death do us part." 330 years old, cracking for the first time. Across the room, through the blur of exhaustion and grief, Colleen heard it. She had expected to feel nothing toward him after this. She did not feel nothing. Later, much later, in a recovery room that smelled of antiseptic and old stone, Colleen woke to find something unexpected. Her reflection in the darkened window, faint, barely there, the suggestion of elongated canines, eyes that caught the light at an angle that wasn't quite human. The blood orchid serum had not fully stopped the curse, but it had done something else entirely, something that would take 6 years, and a great deal of courage. To understand, the next chapter jumps 6 years into the future, and the woman Colleen has become will absolutely surprise you. Some people survive things by becoming harder. Colleen Lawford survived by becoming sharper. Same pale skin, same brown hair, shorter now, pinned back the way doctors pin their hair when they mean business. But something had changed in her eyes, a quality that caught the light a half-second too long at certain angles, a stillness that hadn't been there before the white tile room, and the silence that followed. She was 26 years old, and one of the most respected young physicians in New York. Her research on a specialized blood compound, published under a borrowed name, attributed to anonymous donor sources, had quietly extended the lives of 43 late-stage cancer patients across 4 countries. Nobody knew it was her. She was used to that. She was engaged to Leonard Bington. Steady, ambitious, reliably present. He remembered her grandmother's birthday and made her feel, most days, like someone who deserved ordinary things. She had almost convinced herself that was enough. Almost. The wedding was 3 weeks away when Alexander reappeared. Not dramatically, not at the door. He sent a research funding proposal to her university. Anonymous. Routed through multiple legal entities. For a project titled Extended Human Longevity Through Hybrid Compound Therapy. Her dream. Funded to completion, she recognized the blood orchid extract in the preliminary data before she recognized anything else. She sat with the proposal for 2 days without responding. On the 3rd day, Leonard's phone rang in the next room. His voice carried the specific tone of someone who believes they are alone, and the name she heard through the wall was not one she recognized. She stood in the hallway for a long time. Then she walked to his laptop, opened it. The footage had already been sent to her email. She stared at Leonard's face in a restaurant she'd never visited, with a woman she'd never met, looking the way he never looked with her, and felt something entirely unexpected. Not devastation, relief, which told her everything she needed to know about what she had been settling for. He was waiting outside her building in the November cold, hands in his coat pockets, red eyes still like a wound that had chosen to stay open rather than close wrong. "I sent the footage," he said. "I know." She walked past him. He followed, not grabbing, not commanding, simply keeping pace. The way he used to sit in the lab at 2 in the morning, present, refusing to be elsewhere. 365 days, he said. "Give me that. Let me prove." "Prove what?" She stopped and turned. "That you've changed. That this time is different. You destroyed my engagement so you could step back in. Because that worked so well the last time." The words landed exactly where she aimed them. He absorbed them without flinching, the way tall structures absorb wind. "Yes," he said quietly. "It's exactly what I did. And you have every right to say it." She looked at him. The dried blood orchid fragment was still in her coat pocket. She had carried it for 6 years, telling herself it was a research sample. She had believed that explanation for approximately 3 years before she stopped bothering. "Why does it have to be you?" she asked. Not grief this time. Something cleaner, harder. He was quiet for a moment. "Because no one else remembers the thermos," he said. He remembered. That's the part she couldn't get past. He watched her through a security camera, watched her make oatmeal before dawn, leave a note her grandmother would read 6 times, and he remembered it years later. And still, the recording, that word, manageable. But he stood in that hospital room, holding a child he had no reason to grieve, and his voice broke. For the first time in 300 years, she didn't know what to do with a person like that. She didn't know if there was a word for what he was. She still carries the blood orchid. After 6 years, she doesn't know that the bond between them formed 15 years ago, before the curse, before the plan, before he knew her name. The moment she pressed a sachet into the hands of a boy dying alone in a garden and said, "Don't be afraid, I've got you." She saved him first. Francis's family erased that truth so completely, he had nearly forgotten it himself. He had arranged the car crash, said the word, manageable, let the plan continue when he could have stopped it. He would carry those facts for as long as he existed. But she was walking away through November, and the streets looked the way they did 3 centuries ago, when he had not yet understood that kindness is the one thing power cannot replicate. He would give the empire back. All of it. He already had. She was half a block away when the car detonated. Not an accident. Victor Radbourne had been watching, and Victor had never learned the difference between removing an obstacle and becoming one. The device, engineered to emit concentrated ultraviolet radiation, went off in the vehicle parked 3 feet from where Alexander stood. For a vampire, the exposure was devastating. He didn't move away. He moved toward her. Colleen felt the heat first, a wall of it, and then his body between her and the blast, turning so his back absorbed what her skin never could. She heard him make a sound that bypassed dignity entirely. She pulled back and looked at him, coat scorched through, his shoulders still radiating silver light, and saw what 300 years of practiced coldness looked like when it finally gave up pretending. Raw. Frightened. Furious at itself for being frightened. In sickness and in health, he said through his teeth. The vow she had signed in a basement office while her hand shook and she told herself it wasn't real. I will protect you until the last thing I am is gone. She didn't step back. She stood in the November street with a dried blood orchid fragment in her pocket and looked at the man who had planned her destruction, grieved it, funded her dream, and remembered the thermos, and felt something she had not expected. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the first edge of it, the place where forgiveness begins, not with grand gestures, but with the quiet recognition that someone is genuinely trying. She pressed her hand against his burned shoulder. He went very still. Don't go anywhere, she said. I'm not finished being angry at you. Something moved across his face, almost like sunlight in a place that hadn't seen it in a very long time. For the first time in years, Colleen Lawford knew exactly what she had to do. Not forgive everything at once. Not forget, but choose, with open eyes. With her training and her half-vampire resilience, and the dream she had never once abandoned. To find out if something genuine could be built from the ruins of something calculated. She had ridden through storms before. She could do it again. What Alexander does next. Quietly, without a single word to anyone, is the moment this entire story has been building toward. You won't want to miss it, she said. I'm not finished being angry at you. And she stayed anyway. Is that what healing looks like? Or is that something else entirely? Tell me what you think. 3 days after the explosion, Colleen booked a flight to Geneva, not running. She was clear about that. At least, with herself. Running is what you do when you haven't decided anything. This was different. This was choosing, with both eyes open. To put an ocean between herself and every version of her life that had been shaped around someone else's needs. Her research, her terms, her timeline. She left Alexander a note before she went. Not long, not warm exactly, but honest in the way of someone who has decided the truth is worth more than comfort. I need to know whether what I want still exists when you're not in the room. Give me that. She tucked it beneath the dried blood orchid fragment on the kitchen counter. Not thrown away. Not kept close. Left. The way you leave something when you're not yet certain whether you'll come back for it. Alexander found it an hour after she was gone. He read it twice, set it down. Then he did something he had not done in 330 years. He let someone go without arranging what came next. Leonard Bington was exposed within the week, not by Alexander, but by the hospital board. Colleen had quietly flagged a trail of falsified research citations before her flight, because she had never once confused personal grief with professional responsibility. He was removed from his position before the month was out. Francis Larkin, facing charges within the Vampire Council for 6 counts of covenant fraud, including the stolen credit for a blood orchid rescue performed 15 years prior, appealed twice and lost both times. Permanent exile from New York's Bloodlines. And Alexander, without ceremony, without announcement, abdicated. He dissolved the throne's legal structures, transferred his holdings, and signed the final documents in the same underground office where Colleen had once signed a marriage certificate with trembling hands on a night when the rain wouldn't stop. He did it quietly. He told no one. Then he donated $1 billion, anonymously, routed through the same shell entities as his original research proposal, to a newly established organization. He named it the Lawford Foundation for Human Longevity. Her name, her grandmother's name, the name on the note tucked beneath the Coney Island photograph. He told no one about that either. Colleen found out on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks into her Geneva residency, when her university liaison forwarded the funding confirmation with a subject line that read, "Do you know who this is?" She read the transfer documents 3 times. The foundation name stopped her completely. The Lawford Foundation, not the Radbourne Foundation, not an anonymous grant. Her name, given freely, with no conditions attached, to the dream she had spoken aloud in an underground mansion to a man she'd had no reason to trust. And he had listened. She set the papers down and looked out at a gray Geneva morning and let it reach her fully. No arrangement underneath the kindness. No plan. Just, he had seen her and used the only language he was learning how to speak. She called her grandmother first. Grandma Lawford, 84 now, eyesight fully restored, living in the warm, private residence that had been quietly maintained for 6 years by a benefactor she'd never pressed for a name. Answered on the second ring. "Colleen, sweetheart, are you all right?" "I think so. Grandma, do you believe people can really change?" A pause, the kind her grandmother took before saying something she had known for a long time. "I don't think people change exactly," she said slowly. "I think they finally become who they always were, once they stop being afraid of it." Colleen was quiet for a moment. "I'm coming home," she said. She almost made it through arrivals. Victor Radbourne. Stripped of title. Cornered. The particular desperation of a man who has confused power with identity and cannot survive losing either. Was waiting at the gate with 3 of his remaining guards. Colleen saw him before he saw her, and something she had been noticing for months in Geneva. A sharpening of perception, a clarity around threat. Her half-vampire instincts, dormant until needed, came fully awake. She did not freeze. She pulled out her phone, sent 1 text. Arrivals. Now. Then she walked forward, because she was Colleen Lawford, and she had never once waited for someone else to enter a storm ahead of her. Alexander arrived in 40 seconds, which told her he had been close, not watching, not arranging, simply nearby, in case. What followed was precise and collaborative in the way 2 people are collaborative when they have spent enough time in each other's orbit to anticipate the next move without speaking. Her medical serum neutralized Victor's blood power. Her half-vampire strength held the line. Alexander dismantled the remaining guard with the efficiency of someone who has had 3 centuries to practice. And now, finally, has a reason that matters. Victor fell. Not dramatically, just fell. Undone by the one combination he had never anticipated. A man who had chosen to give up power, and a woman who had learned to use hers. The arrivals hall went quiet around them. Colleen stood with her back against Alexander's chest, both of them breathing hard. Autumn light coming in through the tall windows in long, warm bars across the floor. "You were nearby," she said. "Yes. Not watching. No. Just in case." "Yes." She turned to face him. The way she had looked at him years ago in the back of a car after a graduation party. The way you look at someone when you have run out of reasons to avoid seeing them clearly. "Can we start over?" she said. "Not from the beginning. From here." He reached into his coat pocket. A small sachet. Fresh blood orchid. New petals, not dried. The scent of something that had been waiting a long time to stop being a sample and become a gift. He placed it in her hand. "From here," he said. The arrivals hall felt different, not transformed. Healing is never all at once. But different. The way a room feels when a window is finally opened after a very long winter. Same walls, same floor, same two people. Just air now. Moving through. The final chapter is the one this whole story was really about. And the last scene will stay with you long after it's over. They held the wedding at the Blood Temple. Colleen's idea. Not because the place held easy memories. It didn't. But she had spent enough years in medicine to understand that healing doesn't happen by avoiding the rooms where things went wrong. It happens by walking back in and filling them with something new. The stone walls were unchanged. The floor was the same cold gray, but every alcove was filled with living blood orchid. White petals against ancient stone, their scent moving through the air like the first morning after a very long winter. Warm candlelight replaced the cold blue that had lit this place for centuries. Grandma Lawford sat in the front row in the navy dress she had been saving for an occasion she always believed would come. Her eyes, restored, clear, filled quietly when Colleen came through the door. She didn't cry. She just pressed her hand flat against her chest, as if to say, there it is, at the altar. Alexander knelt. Not the ceremonial kneel of a king, the other kind, the one that costs something. He removed the ring he had worn for 6 years, plain, dark metal, the one he'd put on the day he signed the documents that set everything in motion. The ring he had kept on his finger every day since, as a reminder he was not willing to let himself forget. He held it out, not to give back, not as an offering, but simply shown, the way you show someone a scar to say, I know exactly what this is. I am not pretending it isn't there. Then he set a second ring beside it in his palm. Small, set with a single blood orchid stone, deep red, warm at the center, the color of something alive. You saved me first, he said, 15 years ago, in a garden, before any of this began, before I knew your name. He looked at her steadily. This one is only ours. No transaction, no arrangement. Yours, if you want it. Colleen looked at her grandmother. Grandma Lawford gave the smallest nod, the kind that means, you already know. Colleen took the ring. Their daughter was born on a Tuesday. In a hospital Colleen had helped design. Wide windows, natural light. A neonatal wing funded entirely by the Lawford Foundation. They named her Iris. She had her mother's brown hair, her father's stillness, and eyes that were, from the very first day, the color of something deciding between warm and cool, and choosing warm every single time. By age 3, Iris had discovered she could heal a paper cut by pressing her palm gently over it. She assumed this was something everyone could do. One Saturday morning, rolling sugar cookie dough at the kitchen table with Grandma Lawford. No electric mixer, just the old wooden rolling pin that had been in the Lawford family for 40 years. She asked, "Grandma, are you magic?" Grandma Lawford considered this with full seriousness. "No, sweetheart. I'm just very old and very loved, which is almost the same thing." In the evenings, after Iris was asleep and the apartment was quiet, Colleen and Alexander worked together in their research lab. Expanded now, full of light. He had learned to use a centrifuge, badly at first, reliably, eventually. She had learned that 3 centuries of accumulated knowledge, filtered through someone who had finally decided to stop using it as armor, made for a remarkably useful research partner. They disagreed constantly about protocol, about caution, about the measured pace of human trials versus the urgency she felt every time a new patient file landed on her desk. These were, she had quietly decided, her favorite conversations. There was a morning, ordinary, mid-November, the kind that doesn't announce itself, when Alexander stood at the window of their apartment. Real sunlight, not filtered, not artificial, falling across the floor in the same long, warm bars that had come through the arrivals hall windows the day he placed a fresh blood orchid sachet in her hand and said, "From here." He stood in it, eyes closed, simply standing in sunlight. Colleen watched from the doorway, coffee in hand, the same kind she had been making since the days of broken heating and 4 a.m. alarms, and said nothing. Some things don't need to be named to be real. He opened his eyes, found hers across the room. "Still here," he said. Not surprised, just noting it. With the particular gratitude of someone who spent 3 centuries believing that kindness was a weakness, and has finally, completely, understood that it was the only thing that ever saved him. She raised her coffee. "Still here," she agreed. A human life is not short, not when it is measured the right way, not in years, but in people fed before dawn, in notes tucked beneath photographs, in research shared without credit, in hands pressed against burned shoulders, in small sachets left at thresholds without explanation, measured in kindness given freely, without arrangement, without condition, without any expectation of return. A human life can outlast empires, can cross 3 centuries, can, in the end, heal even the wounds that were never supposed to heal at all. This story reminds us that the most powerful thing any of us carries is not status, history, or time. It is the small, unhurried kindness that no one is watching for. The oatmeal made before sunrise, the note left where someone will find it, the dream spoken quietly into a room that doesn't yet know how to hold it. For those of us who have lived long enough to know what it feels like to give, and wonder if it was ever truly seen. This story says, it was seen. Maybe not immediately, maybe not by the right people, at the right time. But kindness leaves a mark that does not fade. It stays. It waits. It glows in the dark long after the night you placed it there. And if there is someone in your life, a grandchild, a neighbor, a friend you haven't called in too long, whose quiet kindness has gone unrecognized, call them this week. It doesn't need to be a long call. Just tell them you remember the specific, ordinary thing they did that no one else noticed. The covered dish left at the door. The chair pulled out without being asked. The errand run without being thanked. Because those are the things worth remembering. Those are the things that last longer than anything else. The author is a flesh and blood human who spent hours living alongside these vampire characters. It was a real person who cried, felt fear, and trembled while writing every line. AI merely provided gentle assistance to make the story flow smoother and more captivating.